On November 12, 1942, a cargo ship slid into San Francisco Bay, while German submarine commanders, 7,000 miles away, studied their charts and calculated how long it would take to strangle Britain into submission. Admiral Karl Dönitz had built his entire strategy on a simple equation. His U-boats would sink Allied shipping faster than the Allies could replace it. The math seemed irrefutable. A modern cargo vessel required 8 months to build. A single torpedo could destroy one in 8 seconds. The arithmetic of war favored the hunters beneath the waves. But the ship that splashed into the water that November afternoon had not taken 8 months to build. It had not taken 8 weeks. The SS Robert E. Peary had been assembled from keel to launch in 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes. When German naval intelligence received reports of this achievement, they dismissed it as Allied propaganda. No nation on Earth could build a 10,000-ton ocean-going vessel in less than a week. The claim was absurd. It violated every known principle of shipbuilding. The Germans were not stupid. They simply could not imagine what was happening on the other side of the Atlantic. A 57-year-old industrialist who had never built a ship in his life was about to bury the Third Reich under an avalanche of steel. The miscalculation began years before the first torpedo found its target. German military planners had studied American industrial capacity throughout the 1930s and reached conclusions that seemed entirely reasonable. The United States was a nation of consumers and businessmen, not warriors. Its army ranked among the smallest in the world, smaller than Portugal. Its factories produced automobiles and refrigerators, not weapons of war. Its workforce had grown soft during the long years of peace. When President Franklin Roosevelt announced in May 1940 that American factories would produce 50,000 aircraft per year, the German High Command dismissed the claim as fantasy. American military aircraft production in 1939 had totaled fewer than 3,000 planes. The notion that this could increase by a factor of nearly 20 seemed mathematically impossible. Hermann Goering, who had built the Luftwaffe from nothing into the most feared air force in Europe, understood what it took to manufacture modern weapons: the precision engineering, the specialized materials, the years of accumulated expertise. America possessed none of these advantages. Adolf Hitler shared his air marshal's contempt. He told his inner circle that America was a decayed country, half Judaized and half negrified. How could one expect a state like that to hold together? This racial analysis was central to Nazi ideology. Hitler believed that national strength flowed from racial purity and homogeneity. Germany, with its supposed Aryan bloodline, possessed inherent superiority. America, a mongrel nation of immigrants from every corner of the globe, could not possibly match the martial spirit of the German people. But the German analysis contained a fatal flaw. They measured American potential by American performance in peacetime. They saw a nation that had not mobilized and concluded it could not mobilize. They saw factories making consumer goods and assumed those factories could not make weapons. They saw a diverse population and believed diversity meant weakness. They were wrong about everything. Henry John Kaiser was born on May 9, 1882, in Sprout Brook, New York, to German immigrant parents. His father, Franz, was a shoemaker from Steinheim in the state of Hesse. Young Henry left school at 13 and found work as an errand boy for a dry goods store. By 20, he owned photography studios in Lake Placid and 4 Florida cities. When his future father-in-law demanded that he enter a more solid profession, Kaiser moved to Spokane, Washington, in 1906 and drifted into construction supply sales. In 1914, his employer went bankrupt in the middle of a road-building project. Kaiser completed the job himself, on credit, and never looked back. He discovered that he possessed an unusual gift. He could see problems that others could not solve and solutions that others could not imagine. He built roads across the Pacific Northwest at unprecedented speed, laying a mile of pavement per week when the industry standard was 2 miles per month. In 1927, he won an $18 million subcontract to build 200 miles of road and 500 bridges across several Cuban provinces. He completed the project in 4 years instead of 7. Then came the dams. In 1931, Kaiser joined a consortium of 6 companies to bid on Hoover Dam. They won the contract at $48.9 million. Kaiser served as the consortium's Washington liaison, mastering the political networks that would serve him for decades. Hoover Dam was completed 2 years ahead of schedule. Bonneville Dam followed, finished 1 year early. Grand Coulee Dam, stretching nearly 4,000 feet across the Columbia River and creating a 151-mile lake, came in 18 months ahead of schedule. At Grand Coulee, Kaiser's lieutenants split the spillway work into competing teams to see who could finish first. This competitive method would later transform an entire industry. Kaiser also built the piers for the San Francisco-Oakland Bay Bridge and worked on the approaches to the Golden Gate Bridge. When Southern Pacific Railroad, pressured by a cement cartel, refused to transport his materials, he responded by constructing a 9.5-mile conveyor belt over a mountain to deliver aggregate for Shasta Dam. A competitor later explained Kaiser's success with characteristic bluntness. He was successful because he was ignorant. He never knew what he could not do. By the summer of 1940, Britain was hemorrhaging merchant ships to German submarines. Winston Churchill would later write that the only thing that ever really frightened him during the war was the U-boat peril. Existing American shipyards were fully booked with Navy contracts. The Maritime Commission, led by Admiral Emory Land and Vice Admiral Howard Vickery, desperately needed new builders. Kaiser had positioned himself shrewdly. In 1939, he partnered with Todd Shipyards to form Seattle-Tacoma Shipbuilding Corporation, winning a trial contract for 5 small freighters. He had never built a ship, but he had observed Todd's operations closely. When a British delegation arrived in October 1940 carrying plans for tramp steamers, Kaiser bid on a contract to build 60 cargo ships, 30 at a new yard in Richmond, California, and 30 in South Portland, Maine. What convinced the British was not Kaiser's maritime expertise, but his construction record. Massive projects, consistently delivered early, under budget. On December 20th, 1940, the Maritime Commission formally issued the contracts. Kaiser reportedly began construction of the Richmond shipyard 10 hours after signing. Within 78 days, the first keel was being laid. East Coast shipbuilders actively lobbied Washington to block Kaiser. They assured bureaucrats that they were fully prepared to enter the theater when called upon. Kaiser's response to their skepticism was characteristically blunt. "I am a builder, and if you call yourself a builder, you ought to be able to build anything." The established shipbuilders had been building vessels the same way for generations. Ships were constructed from the keel up, piece by piece, on a slipway. Skilled craftsmen who had spent years learning their trades performed each task by hand. A competent riveter might require 6 months of training. A complex cargo vessel required 8 months of construction. Everyone in the industry knew what was possible. Kaiser ignored everything they knew. He did not think about shipbuilding the way traditional shipbuilders thought about it. He approached it as a manufacturing problem. The specific product, whether a ship or a dam or a highway, was less important than the process. Every manufacturing process could be analyzed, broken into components, optimized, and scaled. Traditional shipbuilders accumulated knowledge through apprenticeship. Kaiser did not have years for apprenticeships. He had months. So he designed processes that could be learned in days. The key innovation was prefabrication. Instead of constructing a ship from the keel up on a single slipway, Kaiser built massive modules in dedicated fabrication shops scattered across the yard, complete deck houses, double bottom sections, stern frame assemblies, entire bow units. Some of these prefabricated sections weighed up to 200 tons, with engines and equipment already installed. Cranes working in concert lifted them into position, and welders joined them together. This approach allowed 2,400 workers to labor simultaneously on a single ship, versus approximately 700 with traditional methods. 80% of assembly work happened off the slipway. By the time a keel was laid, most of the ship had already been built. The second revolution was welding. Traditional shipbuilding used rivets, hundreds of thousands of them, to join steel plates together. Riveting was slow, labor-intensive, and required highly skilled workers. Kaiser substituted arc welding for rivets wherever possible. Each Liberty ship eventually required nearly 50 miles of welding. The advantages were transformative. Welding was dramatically faster than riveting. A novice could learn basic productive welding in 1 to 2 weeks, versus 6 months to qualify as a riveter. Eliminating overlapping plates and rivet heads saved approximately 300 tons of deadweight per ship. And welding required less physical strength. opening shipbuilding to women and older workers who could never have swung a rivet gun. Kaiser recruited workers from across the country, farmers from Oklahoma who had lost their land to drought, factory workers from Detroit, laid off during the Depression, women who had never worked outside the home, African Americans seeking opportunities denied them in the segregated South. He built housing for them, established childcare centers for their children, and created a healthcare system to keep them healthy and productive. The healthcare plan grew from 7 cents per day deducted from each worker's paycheck into comprehensive medical coverage. By August 1944, more than 92% of all Richmond shipyard employees were enrolled, covering over 200,000 people, including family members. One observer called it a Mayo Clinic for the common man. After the war, this shipyard health plan would become Kaiser Permanente, the largest managed care organization in the United States. The childcare centers enrolled more than 7,000 children across all Kaiser yards. The Portland centers, the nation's largest, were located at shipyard entrances so parents could drop children in a straight line from home to the center and then to the production line. A revolutionary home food service let any worker buy a pre-cooked family dinner at the end of their shift. Kaiser also built entire cities. Vanport, near Portland, contained nearly 10,000 housing units and sheltered over 40,000 people at its peak, making it Oregon's second-largest city. It included shopping centers, a movie theater, a hospital, schools, and a dedicated commuter train to the shipyards. The workforce that assembled in these yards bore no resemblance to the skilled craftsmen who had dominated maritime construction for centuries. By mid-1944, more than 1 in 4 workers at Kaiser's Richmond shipyards were women. At the Portland and Vancouver yards, 28,000 women comprised approximately 30% of the workforce. They served as welders, burners, scalers, shipfitters, electricians, machinists, and crane operators. Mary Carroll became the first woman welder at Kaiser's Portland area shipyards in April 1942. Her 27-year-old son had been killed at the Battle of Bataan. His death drove her to the shipyard. She earned $1.20 per hour, the same rate as male welders, a vast increase from typical women's wages. Richmond, California's black population grew from 270 in 1940 to approximately 14,000 by 1945, an increase of more than 5,000%. Kaiser sent 170 recruiters across the United States, drawing workers primarily from Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Oklahoma. Betty Reed Soskin, who died in December 2025 at age 104, worked as a file clerk for the segregated all-black auxiliary of the Boilermakers Union. Her observation captures the transformative power of shipyard recruitment. It was possible for a black man to be standing on the sidewalk in Jackson, Mississippi, where Southern tradition demanded that he step off into the gutter if a white person approached. That man could find himself tapped on the shoulder by a Kaiser recruiter, and 2 weeks later be in the city of Richmond, riding in the front of the bus, 10 years before Rosa Parks would refuse to give up her seat in Montgomery, Alabama. Frances Albrier, born in Mount Vernon, New York in 1898 and raised in Tuskegee, Alabama, became the first black woman welder at Kaiser Richmond in 1942. A Howard University graduate, she secured the position only after completing double the required training hours and threatening a lawsuit. The ship these workers built was designated the EC2SC-1 Liberty ship. It was derived from a British tramp steamer design by J.L. Thompson and Sons of Sunderland, England. In September 1940, Robert Cyril Thompson, the 33-year-old managing director of the firm, brought the plans to America. The naval architecture firm Gibbs & Cox adapted the design for American mass production. The Liberty ship measured 441 feet, 6 inches in length, with a beam of 56 feet and a draft of nearly 28 feet. It could carry 10,800 tons of cargo, 2,840 jeeps, or 440 light tanks, or 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition. The ship was powered by a 2,500 horsepower triple expansion steam engine, a deliberately obsolete but simple and rugged design, chosen because modern steam turbines were entirely allocated to warship construction. Speed was 11 knots, not fast, but fast enough. President Roosevelt coined the ship's lasting nickname while reviewing the blueprints. "I think this ship will do us very well," he said. "She will carry a good load. She is not much to look at, though, is she? A real ugly duckling. The ugly ducklings began sliding down the ways in growing numbers. In 1941, the average time to build a Liberty ship was 230 days. Kaiser's methods slashed that figure relentlessly. By the fall of 1942, his yards had reduced construction time to 45 days, then 30 days, then 20 days. But Kaiser wanted a demonstration. He wanted to prove to the world, and to the enemy, that America could build ships faster than U-boats could sink them. A fierce competition developed between Kaiser's two chief lieutenants. His son Edgar managed the Oregon yards. Clay Bedford ran the Richmond yards. In August 1942, Oregon broke records, launching a Liberty ship in 23 days. Richmond responded with 21 days. Oregon countered with 13 days. On September 23, 1942, Oregon built the SS Joseph N. Teal in 10 days. President Roosevelt secretly attended the launch, with his daughter Anna Boettiger christening the vessel. When a reporter asked Kaiser if the Teal could have been built faster, he replied that it could have been done in 8 days, but was delayed so the president could attend. Roosevelt then agreed to a proposal to build a ship in half that time. Richmond accepted the challenge. At 12:01 on the morning of Sunday, November 8, 1942, workers at Kaiser's Richmond Shipyard No. 2 lowered the first keel section of hull, No. 440, into place. The ship's approximately 250,000 individual parts, weighing 14 million pounds, had been pre-assembled into massive prefabricated sections positioned around the slipway. 17 banks of welding machines stood ready on each side of the hull. Day 1 saw the bottom shell unit installed, followed by the inner bottom unit to support the boiler, engine, and pump. Boilers were in place by mid-morning. Transverse bulkheads and the shaft tunnel were installed before nightfall. Day 2 brought the upper deck, lower forepeak, additional bulkheads, and the fantail went into position. Day 3 saw masts, derricks, and superstructure rise above the hull. Day 4 brought wiring, welding, and painting to completion. The forward gun platform and inner stack were installed. At 3:27 on the afternoon of Thursday, November 12, 1942, after 26 minutes of speeches and a performance by a cappella choir, Mrs. Maud Burns christened the vessel. The SS Robert E. Peary slid into San Francisco Bay 4 days, 15 hours, and 29 minutes after her keel had first touched the slipway. The ship was delivered to the Maritime Commission on November 15th, 7 days, 14 hours, and 32 minutes from keel to delivery. She departed on her maiden voyage on November 22nd, loaded with 10,000 tons of cargo. Critics called it a stunt ship, and in one sense they were correct. The Peary was explicitly a propaganda effort. Kaiser called it an incentive ship. The yard normally averaged about 50 days per Liberty ship, but the vessel was real, functional, and served with distinction throughout the war. She supplied trapped soldiers under enemy fire near Guadalcanal. She shipped prisoners of war from Casablanca. She carried men and equipment to Omaha Beach on June 7, 1944, D-Day +1, under constant attack. She continued shuttle service to Normandy until September 1944. The speed records were not merely symbolic. They represented a fundamental shift in the arithmetic of war. Admiral Dönitz had calculated that his submarines needed to sink 700,000 tons of shipping per month to strangle Britain after the United States entered the war. This was more than double his original pre-war estimate, which had assumed only British shipbuilding capacity would need to be overwhelmed. In the early months of 1942, his U-boats came close to that revised target. The assault on American coastal waters began in January 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor. The Germans called it the Second Happy Time. Dönitz had only 5 long-range submarines available for the initial wave, but American unpreparedness made each boat devastatingly effective. U-boat commander Peter Kremer of U-333, surfacing off the Florida coast, described the scene. Before this sea of light, against this footlight glare of a carefree new world, we were passing the silhouettes of ships recognizable in every detail and sharp as the outlines in a sales catalogue. Here they were formally presented to us on a plate. Please help yourselves. All we had to do was press the button. The Americans had not implemented blackout procedures. They had not organized convoys. Navigation lights burned brightly. City lights illuminated the targets. In the first half of 1942, Nearly 400 merchant ships were sunk in American coastal waters. Oil tankers burned off the coast of Florida. Cargo vessels went down within view of New Jersey beaches. Dönitz believed he was winning. If these losses continued, Britain would be strangled. The American war effort would collapse before it could fully mobilize. But even as the U-boats chalked up kills, the shipyards were accelerating. In 1942, American shipyards launched 8 million tons of new shipping. In 1943, they launched over 13 million tons. By December 1942, new construction exceeded losses for the first time. And from that month forward, the Allies never fell behind again. The math that had favored the hunters reversed. Every ship the U-boats sank was replaced by 2 more. At peak production in 1943, American yards delivered 128 Liberty ships in a single month. 3 Liberty ships were being completed every day across all 18 yards. Dönitz watched the numbers with growing alarm. His submarines were sinking ships at a rate that would have won the First World War. But this was not the First World War. This was a conflict against an enemy whose industrial capacity defied comprehension. The culmination came in May 1943. The month became known in German naval circles as Black May. Despite deploying 240 operational U-boats with 118 at sea, Allied losses plummeted to just 58 ships. Meanwhile, 43 German submarines were destroyed, 25% of operational strength, nearly 3 times the previous worst monthly loss. Convoy SC-130 saw 5 U-boats sunk, including U-954, carrying Dönitz's own son, Peter, without a single Allied ship lost. On May 24, 1943, Dönitz issued a general recall, ordering a temporary halt to Atlantic operations. He admitted privately that Germany had lost the Battle of the Atlantic. The shift in production methods came with costs that could not be hidden. The transition from riveting to welding had consequences that became apparent in the cold waters of the North Atlantic. Nearly 1,500 instances of significant brittle fracture occurred in Liberty ships and other welded wartime vessels. Approximately 30% of Liberty ships experienced some degree of cracking. 12 welded ships broke completely in half without warning, though only 3 of these were Liberty ships. The rest were T2 tankers and other vessel types. The T2 tanker SS Schenectady split apart while sitting calmly at her dock in January 1943. British metallurgist Constance Tipper of Cambridge University later proved that the root cause was not the welds themselves, but the steel's behavior at low temperatures. The plates became dangerously brittle in conditions routinely encountered in the North Atlantic. Unlike riveted ships, where cracks stopped at plate boundaries, cracks in welded hulls could propagate unimpeded across the entire structure. The problem was serious, but the strategic calculus was clear. Building ships faster than they could be sunk mattered more than building perfect ships. Remedial measures were developed: crack-arresting riveted straps, rounded hatch corners, improved welding codes. The ships kept coming. The German response to this industrial onslaught revealed the fundamental difference between the two nations at war. American culture rewarded adaptation. When Kaiser's methods produced cracking hulls, engineers analyzed the problem, developed solutions, and implemented them across all yards. When workers encountered obstacles, they improvised workarounds. When commanders identified failures, they documented them and revised training programs. German military culture had calcified around fixed doctrines and personal loyalties. Initiative was discouraged. Failure was often fatal to careers. Hitler interfered constantly in operations, overruling his professionals based on intuition rather than analysis. Commanders learned that disagreeing with the Führer was career-ending at best and potentially fatal at worst. The honest assessments that might have corrected German strategy were suppressed in favor of reports that told Hitler what he wanted to hear. German intelligence on American shipbuilding was consistently too late, too inaccurate, or too generalized to be of direct military value. When reports of the Robert E. Peary's construction time reached Berlin, they were dismissed as obvious propaganda. The German leadership could not accept that their fundamental assumptions about American capacity were wrong, because accepting that truth would require abandoning the racial ideology that justified the entire war. The numbers that decided the Battle of the Atlantic were staggering in their asymmetry. Total Liberty ship production reached 2,700, 10 vessels built at 18 American shipyards between 1941 and 1945. This was the largest number of ships ever produced to a single design. Total deadweight tonnage exceeded 29 million tons, representing 46% of all hulls built under the Maritime Commission program. Kaiser's 7 shipyards alone produced approximately 1,490 ships, 27% of all Maritime Commission construction, completed in 2/3 the time and at 1/4 the cost of the average from other yards. Peak employment across all Kaiser facilities exceeded 200,000 workers. The British, who had initially been skeptical of Kaiser's methods, watched in astonishment. When Kaiser told British and American officials how fast he thought he could build ships, they thought he was delusional. British yards still treated arc welding as suspect, but Britain was in no position to quibble. By 1943, British Commonwealth yards produced approximately 1 million tons per year. American yards produced 6 million tons. At peak production, the United States delivered nearly 800,000 tons of shipping per month, roughly 90 times the 1930s, peacetime average, and approximately 90% of worldwide shipbuilding. Churchill acknowledged American production in his February 1943 speech to the House of Commons. He noted that American shipbuilding had been stepped up to prodigious levels, accounting for over 13 million tons in 1943. He is widely credited with saying that without the supply column of Liberty ships that endlessly ploughed the seas between America and England, the war would have been lost. The SS Stephen Hopkins earned a unique distinction in the annals of naval warfare. On September 27, 1942, the Liberty ship encountered the German armed raider Stier and supply ship Tannenfels in the South Atlantic. Despite being massively outgunned, Captain Paul Buck chose to fight rather than surrender. The crew fought back with their single 4-inch stern gun and inflicted fatal damage on the Stier, which also sank. It remains the only documented case of a Liberty ship sinking an armed German surface combatant. The SS Joseph N. Teal, the 10-day record holder, became the first cargo ship to reach Guadalcanal with supplies for the Marines. The enemy placed a price on her head, but never succeeded in sinking her. As the war entered its final phase, the consequences of German miscalculation became undeniable. The nation Hitler had dismissed as decayed had outproduced Germany by a factor of nearly 3-1. The people he had called soft had fought with determination across 2 oceans. The industrial capacity he had mocked as propaganda had buried the Wehrmacht under an avalanche of steel. By the spring of 1945, Germany was fighting on multiple fronts with resources barely adequate for one. The strategic reserves were exhausted, the fuel supply was depleted, the transportation network was shattered. German soldiers fought with characteristic stubbornness, but they fought without hope. Ammunition was rationed, vehicles were abandoned for lack of fuel. The Wehrmacht that had conquered most of Europe was reduced to scrounging for supplies. American forces, meanwhile, seemed to have unlimited resources. When tanks were destroyed, new tanks arrived. When ammunition was expended, more ammunition appeared. The logistics system that supported the Allied advance was itself a marvel of industrial organization, moving millions of tons of supplies across an ocean and a continent to the front lines. Hitler died in his bunker on April 30, 1945, still convinced that his analysis had been correct. If Germany had lost, it was because the German people had failed him, because his generals had betrayed him, because fate had conspired against him. He never accepted that his fundamental assumptions about America had been wrong. Henry Kaiser lived another 22 years. He died on August 24, 1967, at age 85 in Honolulu, still working 12-hour days. After the war, he launched Kaiser Frazer Automobiles, producing approximately 750,000 cars, including the Henry J, America's first compact car. He acquired Willys Overland and its Jeep brand. He built Kaiser Aluminum and Chemical Corporation into a major enterprise. He developed the Hawaiian Village Hotel, later sold to Hilton. But Kaiser himself predicted his truest legacy. "Of all the things I have done," he said, "I expect only to be remembered for my hospitals." Kaiser Permanente grew from a 7 cents a day shipyard health plan into the largest managed care organization in the United States. A 1945 public poll named Kaiser the civilian who had done the most to help win the war. A 1946 poll named him a strong prospect for the presidency. Franklin Roosevelt had seriously considered him as his 1944 vice presidential running mate before selecting Harry Truman. The shipyards fell silent quickly after the war ended. The 57 leading shipyard organizations went from a peak of over 1 million workers to just 50,000, less than 5% of peak levels. Richmond's shipyards closed. Kaiser's attempts to convert them to other manufacturing failed. The Portland Scrap Company's Idell Exploration purchased 187 decommissioned Liberty ships over 20 years and cut them into scrap. 3 Liberty ships survive today as monuments to what ordinary Americans accomplished when their nation needed them. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien, berthed at Pier 35 in San Francisco, is fully operational and seaworthy, the only Liberty ship retaining its complete original configuration. A D-Day veteran, with 11 crossings to Normandy, she returned to Normandy for the 50th anniversary in 1994 as the sole survivor of the 6,939-ship D-Day Armada to make the voyage. The SS John W. Brown served as New York City's floating maritime high school from 1946 to 1982. She moved to Baltimore in 1988 and now serves as a museum ship. The SS Hellas Liberty, formerly the Arthur M. Huddle, is a static museum ship in Piraeus, Greece. The Rosie, the Riveter World War II Homefront National Historical Park, was established on October 24, 2000, at the former Kaiser Richmond shipyards. It preserves Shipyard No. 3, the most intact wartime-era shipyard, with an iconic 250-ton Whirly crane still standing. The park includes the first national memorial to women war workers. Japan and South Korea explicitly studied and adopted Kaiser's prefabrication and modular construction methods when rebuilding their post-war shipbuilding industries. These methods remain the foundation of modern shipyard practice worldwide. The German misjudgment of America was ultimately a failure of imagination. Hitler looked at Americans and saw their limitations. He did not see their capacity for growth, for adaptation, for rising to challenges that seemed insurmountable. He mistook the America of peacetime for the America that would emerge under pressure. Nations are not fixed quantities. Societies are not static. The capabilities that exist in peacetime are not necessarily the limits of what is possible in war. A country that seems weak in one moment can become strong in the next if its people have the will and the organizational capacity to mobilize. Germany had built its military over years of preparation. The Wehrmacht that invaded Poland in 1939 was the product of decades of planning, training, and investment. German strategists assumed this head start was decisive, that no nation could close the gap quickly enough to matter. America closed the gap in months, not by matching German quality, which would have taken years, but by overwhelming German quantity with American abundance. The American approach was different from the German approach, less elegant, less refined, but ultimately more effective. The factories that built Liberty ships have mostly been demolished. The workers who staffed them have passed into history. The war they helped win ended 8 decades ago. But the story matters because the principles endure. The workers who achieved this transformation were not supermen. They were housewives who learned to weld in 2 weeks, farmers who had never seen the ocean, sharecroppers who rode the front of a California bus for the first time in their lives. They did these things because circumstances demanded it, and because someone believed they could. The enemy looked at America and saw a decayed country that could not hold together. They were looking at the wrong America. The America that mattered was the one that built ships in days and trained welders in weeks, that absorbed defeats, learned from them, and came back stronger. That America was messy and chaotic and inefficient by German standards, but it won. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. We would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans the globe, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.